So hi everybody, I'm really happy that I get to pitch at the Start Tank, and we're NeoCarbon and we capture carbon at scale with cooling towers. So basically today we're emitting over 51 billion tons of CO2 per year. That's the equivalent of one Great Pyramid of Gizeh every hour of every day. So obviously there's drastic consequences from this. And for example, the IPCC, so the UN body for climate control, estimates that at this point, on top of immediate drastic emission reduction, we also will need to remove 10 to 20 billion tons of CO2 per year before 2050 to avoid irreversible catastrophic climate change. That's not good. And the problem on top of this is that right now, the only scalable technology to do this is called direct air capture. So that's the actual technology to bring CO2 back directly from the atmosphere, from the air. But it's too expensive at 1,000 euros per ton today. So let's take a look quickly at why is it so expensive and how does it work? So basically, it works in two steps. First, you have the kind of capture part called adsorption, when you need to blow an enormous amount of air on your capture unit. And the reason why you need that much air is because there's only a tiny fraction of CO2 in the air. It's about 0.04%. So to capture a significant amount of CO2, you need very, very large fans that are very costly to build and of course costly to run. And once you saturate your capture unit, you divert your airflow somewhere else, and then you have to use enormous amount of heat this time to actually release that CO2 you just captured in a pure stream that you can use somewhere else or sequestrate. And at NeoCarbon, we realized that there's already millions of machines around the world that have very similar functionality. They're called cooling towers. So here are examples. And basically, they're used in virtually every industry to cool down things. And for that, they have enormous fans that blow a lot of air to cool down things. So in the perspective of why is it good for direct air capture? Well, we can use those fans and that airflow to take the CO2 out while you're at it. So we don't have to build any fan, and the fan is already running, so we don't have to pay anything for it. So it's already a pretty drastic cut of costs, both on CapEx and OpEx. And then of course, as the name implies, they're blowing out heat. So there's a lot of available waste heat that we can use to actually also drastically reduce the cost of the concentration step here. And on top of all this, those cooling towers are present in industrial areas where a lot of industries are currently buying CO2 to use as an input in their processes. And right now with the rising prices of oil, transport, which is a big cut of the cost of CO2, is going up as well. So by producing on site, we also have this kind of OpEx cut on top of everything else. So to recap, cooling towers can perform direct air capture using their existing airflow and inherent waste heat very cheaply. And they're also very scalable because they're used, as mentioned, in virtually every industry. So in EU alone, there's over 3,000 towers that, if we retrofit them all, could capture over 1 billion tons of CO2 per year. That's 10% of our targets. That's quite huge. And at scale, by using this retrofitting approach and leveraging all these untapped resources, we can actually have a 10 times more cost-effective direct air capture process at around 100 euros per ton. The market is in fact enormous. So if you do the math, with a very low price of 100 euros per ton and the 10 billions of ton, that's the lowest estimate of what we need to achieve before 2050 at this point. It's very optimistic as well, if you ask me. You're already at 1 trillion euros per year. In EU alone, with our estimate of 300,000 larger cooling towers, that's, as mentioned, 1 billion tons that can be captured. And just retrofitting 10% of this market would enable NeoCarbon to have a 10 billion euros per year revenue. We're today building our MVP. So we incorporated in January 2022 with some funding from the VC fund OnPad. And we spent the next couple of months building our proof of concept and building the team. Then during the last couple of months, we've also validated demand by conducting numerous discussions with potential partners and consumers. And some of these discussions have actually converted now to commercial pilot implementation discussions. So we are actually on the process of signing LOIs with some of the partners. And on a more internal product development timeline, we've also joined our hardware accelerator. So this will enable us to build our MVP by the end of summer. And all of this leading to our commercial pilot, the first commercial installation in Q1 2023. Our team is basically science experts and startup experts like myself and René, the two founders. We're both engineers with extensive startup experience. René has been the right hand of a CEO in his previous company, where he was leading a funding round of over 50 million, or involved, sorry, in a funding round of over 50 million. And I've been leading my team for 5 years as CTO of my previous company, which I exited in 2019. And Drew is our head of R&D, and he has a PhD in carbon technology and also industry experience at Bilfinger. And Koji has been 5 years working at ExxonMobil in their cooling tower department. We are currently
time is up.
Round. And yes, thank you very much. Looking forward to your questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Sylvain. Let me get the other investors on here, and then we can open things up. And while I'm getting them lined up, one of the first questions that I had for you is, so this $100 number is that's the market going rate for carbon capture currently, correct?
Well, I mean, let's say that's the target that everybody's trying to reach before 2050. So today, the actual price, the only player in the world that actually can do carbon capture is called Climeworks, and they have a capacity of around 4,000 tons per year, and their actual price is around 1,000 euros per ton. So our estimate with our technology is around 100 euros per ton, which is 10 times cheaper.
Okay. Are there any economies of scale here? For instance, Tesla had to build the expensive car to get to be able to build the cheap car at scale. Is this something where, as more players get into this and as more companies come online?
Yes, I mean, we have developed a pretty extensive what's called a techno-economical analysis, so TEA, that actually shows how our cost evolves. And of course, today we are not at 100 euros per ton. So there were a lot of parameters involved in this 100 euros per ton. There's of course first and foremost this leveraging of the waste heat and the capex cuts from the existing installations. So that's a big chunk. But of course, from our own economies of scale, our learning by doing, and of course, the evolution of our sorbent. So we're also developing our proprietary IP to develop on the long term. So today we are at much closer to like, let's say a few hundred euros per ton is our current cost estimates for the early versions. And then we'll go down to 100 euros per ton in the coming 2 or 3 years.
Is that the theoretical limit?
That is not the theoretical limit, but that's what we consider our conservative estimates, basically. Like you can find numbers from other startups. There's basically this market is enormous. So right now today it's empty. As globally, we can capture around 10,000 tons per year. And as mentioned, we have to go to 10 billion at least per year. So we have to scale the whole market by 1 million times, which means that it's a completely blue ocean. And of course, there's a lot of different ways to actually achieve and capture direct air capture. So our approach, we believe, is the best fitted for our team and presents unique advantages because there's also, for example, this CO2 utilization opportunity from the fact that it's in industrial areas. So you have like a lot of synergies with that we think makes it a lot more viable than other approaches. But in any case, the point is that there is basically, yes, a lot of different players doing this different approaches to direct air capture. And that's basically like how you get those prices. I think I got myself lost a little bit. Like, can you repeat just the exact question? I'll try to make a better answer.
What I was trying to figure out is, so the 1 trillion market is based off of the $100 price point. What I was trying to see is how far the theoretical limit is, because if you eventually got carbon capture down to 1,000th of a penny per ton, the total market is suddenly a very different scale.
No, okay. So no, I get your point. Yeah. So let's put it like this: that this 100 euros per ton, the problem is not could we get lower than this? Is are we ever going to get there? It's theoretically you can get lower than this, of course, because theoretically we can have very much unlimited supply of clean energy and things like this. But talking to, for example, one of our advisors that's very close connected to Climeworks, that leading player I mentioned before, he's actually pretty skeptical that these kind of numbers under 100 euros can happen anytime soon or ever, really. So that's what I was trying to say. Like, there's a lot of players out there and there's a lot of numbers, but one has to remember that the only player that actually has real life based number is Climeworks, and right now those numbers are 1,000 euros per ton, and they've been at it for quite many years. So of course, there's a lot of things they're doing, in my opinion, wrong. But it's going to be quite the tough competition to get under the 100 euros per ton.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Michael and Daniel?
Yeah, I'm curious if you have, opinions that you can share with us about the regulatory or lack of regulatory support for like a creation of a carbon credit market, and how you all think about whether or not you find that to be a risk factor or not for your business.
Yeah, so I purposely avoided the whole carbon credit discussion because it's a very complicated one in its own, but very good question. The point is, on the long term, obviously, this utilization strategy we're talking about, that's not going to be what we want to achieve, because we want to be truly carbon negative. Otherwise, we're not getting anywhere, basically. So yes, eventually we're going to have to do into carbon credits. And the thing is, there is currently a lack of basically regulation, as you mentioned, for carbon removal credits. Because it's such a new thing. Like, there's basically, until like a few years ago, or even let's say right now, there's basically, again, no one that can provide those removal credits, technological removal credits. So right now, what you can have is you have offset credits. So for example, replacing a coal plant with solar panels or something like this. And those are obviously much less good quality credits, because in the end, you're not removing carbon from the atmosphere, which is what we need to do. We have basically used our carbon budget. And so since we cannot stop all emissions, if only because people leaving are emitting as well, we need to also remove all the time now. And that means that there's this kind of carbon removal credits are going to be much needed. And actually in the Science-Based Target Initiative, so this is when you hear companies saying like, yes, we're going to be net neutral by 2030 or 2040 or whatever, what they mean, they're typically aligning their targets with this initiative called the Science-Based Targets. And for those, basically, they also realize that, okay, a company that's producing some value cannot go to 0% emission. Like it can basically probably go to 90%. So they're going to ask you to go to 90%. And then the last 10%, you're going to be able to allowed to emit, continue to emit, but you're going to have to use carbon removal credits so that the total sum is actually zero. If you think about carbon offset, you have produced 1 ton of CO2 and you're offsetting it somewhere else. There's still 1 ton that went into the atmosphere. If you actually have 1 ton that's produced and then you remove 1 ton somewhere else, like, then you're actually net is actually zero. So this is why the carbon removal credits will be in very, very high demand by the late 20s and onwards. Yes, because the Science Target Initiative typical net zero targets start in 2030. So that's kind of like we're in the transition period right now.
Got it. Great. Thank you. I think that's really helpful. I think. Oh, I'm sorry. Please go ahead, Daniel. I'll graph you.
Just one quick question on my side. How easy is it for you to retrofit cooling towers?
So that's the interesting thing. We're obviously at this point discussing with like our go-to-market strategy these days is basically signing partnership with cooling tower manufacturers. So this means that we get access to their customer base. So typically, if you're an industry and you have a cooling tower, you're basically getting that from a manufacturer, and they take care of like maintaining it over the lifetime. So that can be 20, 30, 40 years. And so these cooling tower manufacturers, they have ongoing on-site relationship with their customers, which means that they, first of all, can get us access to those customers and let us install our machines by basically facilitating the communication with those customers. And then basically they also know and have access to their cooling towers all the time. So the way we see this is that we've designed our product to be as least impactful on the cooling tower as possible. As basically it's a plug and play system when you redirect the airflow of the tower into our unit. And then we basically add a couple tubes to get the hot water, so the heat to be evacuated, we take it through our system. So it's very minor kind of adjustment. It's very transparent to the cooling tower. So also if there's a fail-safe mechanism that if something goes wrong, we can basically make our whole system completely transparent. So it basically is completely downstream of the cooling tower and doesn't modify it too much, or at all. So it doesn't modify at all, and it's not too much effort to install it anyways. Yeah, and that's basically it. And then talking to cooling tower manufacturers, we also are actually talking about partnering up on the actual connection from the cooling tower to our units, that they could take care of this, because of course they know their cooling tower specs much better than we do, and it's not the core part of what we do. Like, we're focusing more on the, of course, capture unit and chemistry / mechanical engineering behind these units. So that could be also a way to facilitate the deployment.
Thanks. Go ahead, Michael.
I just wanted to ask about agreements with the large corporations that seem to be driving this market, right? Like the Stripes and Microsofts of the world. I would love to know a little bit more about any contact that you all have had with those potential buyers, and what, if any, details that you can share from those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. So indeed, like right now, so that's even another step into the kind of carbon discussion. So on top of carbon offset and then carbon removal, right now, what most of the industry is actually going for is this kind of supporting the development of carbon removal. So everybody is aware, like we have to scale this market 1 million times. Nobody has really fixed it yet. So you can't really even buy those carbon removal credits right now. So the bigger players, as you mentioned, for example, Stripe, that's been leading these efforts. What they do is they buy carbon credits, not to kind of offset or remove their own footprint, but just to support the development of companies such as ours, so that they can see that in the long run, they have the biggest impact possible. Their idea being that if I'm the first customer of a company like NeoCarbon, then I enable them to go to the next stage, and then they can scale their their removals. And by buying this early 1,000 tons, then actually I let them sell 100,000 tons in the whole history of their company. Basically, that's the way kind of things have been going. And there's, for example, this Frontier Fund with other big players like Microsoft and BCG and all of this, almost €1 billion has just been pledged a couple of months ago. And yeah, so from our side, we haven't applied yet to this kind of specifically the Stripe program or the Shopify program yet. We're a bit too early for this. We believe you basically need to be able to, I think from memory, promise 1,000 tons of removal already by a year or something like this. But what we have done is we've been in talk with different pre-procurement platforms. So the leader of those is Pure Earth. So basically what they do is, again, they match players that are not Stripe, but some other players that would like to do carbon removal with companies that will eventually sell carbon removal credits. So they do kind of similar thing, but they're the middleman in between those two supply and demand side of the market. And with those, we also have couple other platform we're talking to. One of them is from one of our advisors. He's also building his own launch pad for carbon removal. And we have an LOI with a third player. So what I can divulge from these arrangements is that the prices are in the several hundreds of euros per ton, closer to the thousands of euros per ton for removal. And for example, Puro, they accept pre-procurement until 10 years from now. So they're completely backlogged. They don't expect a direct air capture technology company to actually be able to deliver within a few years. As I mentioned, it's a very new market, but they're already pre-selling credits from a very long time ahead because there's just so much demand.